How to read books in a foreign language when you don't fully understand. So I think this is something a lot of people have difficulty with, or maybe it's just me, but it's really frustrating to read books when you don't know like half the words or even like 10% of the words. It can still be annoying to read. So I'm basically going to address in this video how you can actually read books in a foreign language that you're learning and enjoy reading them and make progress as well to become better at them. So let's get into it. Reading, I think, is a bit like juggling. And the reason I say that is because it employs tons of different micro skills. When you're juggling, you need to multitask, you need to focus, you need to have extreme presence, you're not thinking about anything else, and probably more coordination, etc. Reading is exactly the same. We don't really realize that when we're reading, we're actually doing a bunch of different things at once. We're seeing words, we're recognizing them, we're converting them to the actual information that each word means, like the picture in your brain, etc. And you're actually doing even more things when you're reading in a foreign language because you've kind of got one hand tied behind your back and you have to translate the words and you're just not as fast and you're not as familiar with the rhythm, etc. So understand that when you're reading, you are actually doing something way more difficult when you're reading in a foreign language than just trying to read. But here is actually the problem. What happens when you're reading in a foreign language is you basically forget, and forget's in air quotes because what you're actually doing is not using them. You're forgetting the kind of micro skills you use when you're reading in your native language and you're not actually using them when you read in a foreign language. So I'll give you an example. When you read in a native language and you see a word you don't know, pretend you see the word pontificate, for example. It means to talk about something you don't really understand. Kind of like what we do on this channel. But normally, if you didn't know what that meant, you could either know what it meant just from the context, or you would Google it if you really, really wanted to. But most people would just keep reading. Like, you don't really care that much about one word you don't know. It's not a big deal. But when you're reading in a foreign language, as soon as you hit a word you don't know, instead of doing the same thing, instead of either looking it up or just reading over it, which is what you do most of the time, otherwise you'd be Googling things all day, you get so kind of frustrated, you stop, and it's kind of like taking 1 HP off your patience, and then eventually you'll just put the book down because you've read 15 words you don't know, and it's so bad, it's terrifying, even though you don't even know the language, so why would you know all of the words? But yeah, it's kind of like when you're juggling. If you've ever tried juggling, as soon as you like drop one thing, like I used to juggle like limes and stuff at work when I was cutting up fruit, and I'm not particularly good at it, but as soon as I drop one lime in my brain, I'd be like, ah, fuck this, because I know I'm going to drop all of them now. It's kind of hard to, because you try and catch the one that's falling and you waste time and then you end up dropping the rest of them. That's kind of what happens when you're reading in a foreign language. So when you read in a foreign language, you need to remember that dropping one ball, missing one word is not the end of the world, and you just need to keep going. So how do we actually do that? The goal of reading is super important. When people read in a foreign language, they get so frustrated over stupid things. The goal is to get better at the language. That is the goal. The goal isn't to understand everything. If that was the goal, you'd be stuffed. That's a stupid goal. Of course you're not going to understand everything. I don't even understand everything in English, and I've been speaking this language for 18 years. So when you're reading in a foreign language, your goal is to get better. And there's two ways to read in a foreign language. We can read either extensively or intensively. And I've talked about this before, but I'll just briefly go over it now. So extensive reading is basically the way you read most of the time in English. It's flow reading, reading for pleasure. You could just read through something, and if you miss words because you don't know them, that's fine. And then there's intensive reading, which is basically, you wouldn't really read intensively unless you were reading a contract in English, but when you're reading in a foreign language, it can be kind of useful to like pull apart words, understand grammar, put together word lists of things you don't understand, etc. So you can do both of these things, but the important thing to remember is that if you don't understand words while you're extensively reading, there's no need to automatically switch to intensive mode and try and figure out what the word means. You can just keep reading. It's not a big deal. If you want to do an intensive read, that's fine. You can stop at every word you don't know and write it down. Just don't kick yourself in the ass. Don't be so frustrated that you can't understand every single word. And a few of my tips just for actually learning words, you can try the input repetition method, which is effectively you read a chapter of a book, or it doesn't matter, anything similar, and then you reread it and you make a list of all of the words that you don't know. Then you put all those words into flashcards with their translations, you memorize them, and then you reread the chapter again, and you'll find you actually understand it because you've learnt all of the words. And you'll build those kind of mental connections. And another thing you can do is just to Google Translate words every so often. So if you see a word that's kind of fun, like, I think I saw the word in Russian, the verb, sfokusirovatsiya, which I think it means to focus. I haven't actually looked at it in a few weeks, so I'm impressed I remembered that. Sfokusirovatsiya. Someone can comment down below if they speak Russian. But I was like, oh, that's kind of fun. Like, it's really long and I didn't really know what it meant. So I Google translated it, figured out what it meant, and I can use it in sentences now. Like I could say, я сфокусирован. Я сфокусирован. I'm not going to try and, it's too long for me to do it while I'm trying to make a video. And I'm still learning. But yeah, you can just kind of start using words like that. And just have some patience as well. Like, there's no reason for you to be good at something that you've basically never done. It's kind of a lack of patience. And I get it, we all have that, especially nowadays when we've got our phones and we can just get anything like that. But you need to try and have more patience. And don't bite off more than you chew. If you're not reading at a comprehensible input level, as in you're reading very difficult content, it's going to be very, very difficult to actually concentrate and to feel fulfilled, and it's just going to be too hard. So try and read at a level you can actually understand some of it, and I'll talk about what you can read right now. So a few examples are beginner texts or that are free online. You can read stories for learners, you can read translations like Harry Potter, you can read books for natives if you're more advanced. Wikipedia is great because you can read about topics that interest you and learn those words. You can watch the news, you can read blogs, you can read websites, etc. You can read subtitles when you're watching something as well. Whatever you want, it doesn't matter. That's literally the answer. Read what you enjoy. Targeting helps as well. So if you're going to target a certain word type, for example, food, it might be useful to read books about cooking and that kind of thing, and try and read a few in one go to actually get those foundations down. And I also like to say multiple coats of paint as well. If you just learn something once, you're very likely to forget it because you haven't actually put it into your long-term memory, and your brain doesn't recognize it as important. So make sure you go over things a few times to kind of really lock it in. And just remember that learning is exposure plus repetition. So you need to be exposing yourself to new and difficult things. That's just the learning process. And also continually go over it, like repeat what it is. Make sure you keep kind of exposing yourself to it so your brain actually learns that it's important and locks it into your long-term memory. That's how things go into your long-term memory, by your brain recognizing they're important. And repetition is the best way to do that. So yeah, that is basically the video, guys. Thank you for watching, and I hope you... Is that the video? Do I have more stuff? What's going on? That's the video. Lovely. Well, I'm going to try and make a sentence with that word. The verb was sfokusirovacija. So I could say, я сфокусироваюсь. Я сфокусироваюсь на этот video. I focus on this video. That's absolutely terrible. Sorry, I've never said any sentence like that before in Russian. So it's probably really bad. Someone can try and critique that below if they want. Or they can try and leak my address and kill me. I don't know, whatever you want to do. But thank you for watching, and have a good one.